I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, we have sorely changed. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, 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 oh.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Yes! Yes! It's me! Keep clapping! Clap for the miracle that we actually made it to 2021, but for some reason it seems to be somehow worse than 2020. But how would we know that you wanted the miracle if you didn't keep clapping? Folks, welcome to this amazing episode of My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. And apparently this is now the second time this year, which is the only 2 times this year that I've now said literally. And I'm not sure if I'm going to keep doing that. I hope I don't, because I already find it annoying. This is a Muddy Waters Media production. Check us out on Google Play, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Anchor. Go to anchor.fm/muddiedwaters. Go to our Twitter, our Periscope. We are on iTunes. We are on Google Play for all of the podcasting apps. We are on Float. We're on Twitch. We're on LinkedIn. Check us out everywhere. Check us out on all the podcasting apps. Anywhere that you are on the internet, we are also there. Check us out there. Be sure to like us, follow us, 5-star us, hit the bell if you're on YouTube. I want your phone to blow up every single time we put out anything. Okay, we want you to get those notifications morning, noon, and night. Be sure to hit the bell and share this right now. However you're watching, listening, if this is live, pre-recorded, however you are consuming this content that I have curated and created in real time for you, be sure to share it right now. The last thing I want is for you and your closest loved ones to miss out on a roughly hour-long libertarian podcast on a Wednesday evening. Be sure to give the gift of Spike Cohen today. Kids love it. This episode, of course, is brought to you by the Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus, the fastest growing waffle-related caucus in not just the Libertarian Party, but in any party on this planet. Be sure to join the Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus Facebook group, which is named Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus. And if you want to become a member, we have buttons for sale at the Muddied Waters store on Muddied Waters Media. This episode, of course, is also brought to you by Nug of Knowledge, a interesting new brand of CBD that's actually smokable and edible. It is CBD and it is 100% legal and compliant. It is not your everyday CBD supplier. A portion of the profits go to help end the war on drugs and also are part of a compassionate use program that donates medicinal hemp products to veterans and people with disabilities who can't afford these natural remedies on their own. Many who use it say that it helps with joint pain, stress relief, or a much-needed pick-me-up. Be sure to use checkout code SPIKE, S-P-I-K-E, for 10% off. This episode, of course, is also brought to you by personal injury attorney Chris Reynolds, attorney at law. If you are in or near the Tampa Bay area of Florida and you find yourself personally injured, be sure to call Chris Reynolds at go to, I don't know his phone number actually, but sure to go, you can find out his number by going to chrisreynoldslaw.com. Chris Reynolds will get you money. I probably should find a better way to say that, but if you are hurt, he will lawyer you some money. chrisreynoldslaw.com. I don't really understand how personal injury law works, which is why I just said it that way. The intro and outro music to this and every single episode of My Fellow Americans is brought to you by the amazing and talented Mr. Joe Davi. That's Jodavi. Check him out on his Facebook. Go to his SoundCloud. Go to joedavimusic.bandcamp.com and you can buy his entire discography. It's like $25. It's like hours of amazing music. Be sure to go there right now. Thank you so much to Mr. Joe Davi. I'd like to thank Kroger for this delicious purified drinking water that I am drinking on this episode of My Fellow Americans Bulavanaka. Oh, you can taste the Kroger. That's delicious. Shout out to Taron Turks' mom and him as always. Folks, my guest tonight is an absolute champion for education. He's actually the former managing editor of Champion News. I told you he was a champion. And also of Education Matters, which are two publications that are focused on education reform. He has talked about education reform on Fox News, ABC Chicago, multiple other radio outlets and newspapers and websites across the U.S. He has been a presenter on panels discussing education choice, Common Core, homeschooling, and the Illinois Freedom of Information laws with groups such as American Majority, Americans for Prosperity, Illinois Tea Party groups, homeschool conventions, and state legislative hearings. And he is on here tonight with me, Spike Cohen, and we will not rest until we have single-handedly solved the education crisis here in this country. That is my solemn promise to you, and I just made it on behalf of Lennie as well. Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, please welcome to the show my guest, Lennie Jarratt. Lennie, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Spike. This will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. This is a topic that is near and dear to me, and I really look forward to talking with you about this. And folks, be sure to chime in with your thoughts and questions. Muddied admins are standing by, and Lennie and I will let you know if you are right or wrong. Now, Lennie, just out of curiosity, I'm reading about your bio, and I'm hearing all the things that you've done. You are absolutely fantastic when it comes to education reform. What got you into this? Like, what was there a moment that just made you realize you had to make your life's advocacy focus on education, or was it sort of a cumulative thing? Everyone has their story for why they do what they do. Tell us the Lennie Jarratt story.
Well, I kind of got started because I was actually researching a school referendum in my local public school district. And about 2 weeks into doing that, the website I put up to placed all my FOIA requests and everything, all the information I get back. I was letting everybody to try to decide what they wanted. My website got hacked, and I turned out to have a cyber stalker for about 6 years, and found out it was a husband of a teacher in the local school district. And the more they pushed me, the more I pushed back, and the more I researched and figuring out what was wrong with the public school system, per se, for the most part, who was running it and what the problems were. And that just led me down this whole path of, okay, education choice is actually the answer. Parents need to be empowered instead of all the power being in the hands of local bureaucrats, federal bureaucrats, and state bureaucrats.
So it was, this is fascinating. So you were hacked. And you said, you found out who it was, and you said, I'm going to show them. I'm going to fix, I'm going to, eliminate a problem that this man's, I guess, wife was a part of with the teachers unions or whatever.
Yep, she was, and it wasn't. At the time, I didn't understand exactly what the problems were.
Right.
I just was kind of trying to find out to see if they needed a tax referendum. So they turned me, a mild-mannered computer programmer, into an education reform expert and advocate by attacking me and continuing to attack me over and over again. So I just kept digging until I found out what the real problem was. And I did find out what the real problem was. Parents don't have any power right now, and that's the issue.
Right. So you're like the Batman of education reform. You were just a mild-mannered guy, and then they came after you, and they kept coming after you, and eventually you said enough, or you actually kept more and more saying enough, and now you are talking with a Jew in his basement. And this is
yes, absolutely.
This is perfect. So, well, hey man, thanks so much for coming on. I want to ask you, Lennie, 50 years ago, as you know, or roughly 50 years ago, the Federal Department of Education was created with the intention of increasing literacy rates and lowering the student-to-teacher ratio. And they've spent, once you factor in inflation, they have spent well over $2 trillion, almost $3 trillion. And all of those things have gotten worse during that time. So I would assume that we can agree that the federal government has done a bad job. But is that where it started, or was it before that? And if so, what actually led to, what was the catalyst that started making education so bad in the U.S. to begin with?
Well, the federal intervention really kind of got it kicked off more and more and more. I mean, but actually something you might want to know is the Department of Education was actually created about 168 years ago. People didn't want it as a department, so it became an office underneath the Commerce Department up until the 1970s, when Jimmy Carter elevated it back to the department, back to a full department cabinet status.
That's interesting.
So, but yeah, the federal government started intervening actually back in the 30s and 40s, and under the guise of, we need more farming programs, we need all this. So they wanted to require that. And the more intervention the federal government did into the states, the worse education kind of became. They took more, the control was no longer local. And then the states started taking more and more control because they had to answer to the feds. And so this never ending cycle of intervention into local education.
Lennie, are you telling me that the more government takes power away from citizens and centralizes it into the hands of politicians and bureaucrats and cronies, that somehow makes things worse?
Yep. Imagine that.
I'm shocked. I'm going to need a minute just to process that. No, so this is actually something that has been kind of in a similar way with healthcare. Healthcare problems didn't start with Obamacare or even with Medicare and Medicaid. This is stuff that really started in earnest, shockingly enough, between the period of Woodrow Wilson and FDR. So it sounds like kind of a similar thing with this. What were some of the first things that happened that really kicked off, the centralization of healthcare and the ensuing collapse of results that happened as a result of that?
I'm not as familiar with how the centralization for healthcare happened and stuff like that.
I'm sorry. I meant no. I'm sorry. I meant education. I apologize.
Education. Yeah. Well, it really was. Actually, after Jimmy Carter did that, then there was the education secretary under Ronald Reagan put out that report, came a book, A Nation at Risk, which then the federal government and congressmen and legislators all think we have to do something about this because education is going the wrong way. So they feel like, we got to do something about this. But then the more they do, the worse it gets because they put all this control in the federal departments of education. So the state groups, education departments have to file, even now, with the federal department, any of their education plans. If they want to change something, they're going through the federal Department of Education on how they're going to fix things and how they're going to do things. That's why right now the teachers unions and the public schools get so upset whenever states are looking at doing any type of school choice, because that takes that child then is out from under the state and then from under the federal government. So they can't interfere with their education anymore. So it's all actually, if you follow the money, it's really about the money. The more children that are educated in the public school system, the more money the state spends, and then the more money that the federal government spends. So they control a lot more that way.
So, this is the cycle of government failure, right? Government fails at something or makes it worse. They use that as a pretext for even more control And then as a result of that, things, there's more power taken from people and more infringement on their rights and on their property. They're robbed more and more of their ability to make choices and the money with which they can make those choices effectively. And then they fail even harder, repeating the cycle that continues. So,
Yes.
here are some more recent examples of how this ends up playing out. There was the No Child Left Behind bill that happened during George Bush, or as I call it, an increasing number of children being left behind, because that's really what it is. Or another way to call it is the scantronization of education, where it's increasingly just. Well, I'm going to let you talk about it. What happened with No Child Left Behind, and how did that create the even worsening of education? I keep wanting to say healthcare, of education.
Yeah.
If I say healthcare, assume I'm saying education, and blame it.
Okay.
Blame it on public schooling too.
Yeah. Yeah, well, No Child Left Behind just basically, again, it just gave more control to the federal government through the Department of Education so that they could regulate and do more stuff. Actually, it's about 8% of the money comes from the federal government into a local public school.
Right.
But it's over 40% of the regulations are from the federal government. So you can see the disconnect right there. If it was only 8% of the regulations came from the federal government with 8% of the money,
right,
we actually wouldn't have as big a problem as we have right now.
So nearly half of the regulation is coming from the government, and all of the money is coming from the taxpayer. Let's be clear. When we're talking federal money, that's our money. When we're talking state money or even school district money, that's our money that's being spent. But so they're only giving 8% of the total funding that's happening, but they're putting in, which explains why there's been, I wish I had the time, I had thought to get the chart, but we've seen how the administrator to teacher ratio has gone completely out of control. There are, by a fact, I think an entire order of magnitude, more administrators than there are teachers.
Yes, I forgot the exact number too, but I know administrators have gone up by over 700% since, I think it's 1982. Student population has gone up barely over 100%, and teachers have gone up about 159%. So everything's going into administration to deal with all the paperwork they have to deal with right now. But we don't want to forget the Elementary Secondary Education Act, which was back under Lyndon Johnson, that then No Child Left Behind replaced, which is now the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, supposedly is what they called it. Is that which we're currently under, that replaced No Child Left Behind.
What's crazy is whatever these bills are called, you can almost rest assured that it's going to do the opposite. So No Child Left Behind, many children were left behind. What was this one called? Every Student Succeeds Act?
Every Student Succeeds Act.
So we can be almost
Every Student Fails Act.
I was going to say No Student Succeed Act. It ends up becoming the exact opposite of what was promised. It's insane to watch this stuff. I just traveled the country campaigning last year for vice president. We came in third, by the way. And I like to say that we came in third. It was far behind in third, but we came in third every single state. Anyway, whatever, that doesn't matter. I was in 35 different states, 75 campaign stops, and I talked to a ton of teachers. In fact, I even did some interviews and shows with teachers across the country, and also people that were heads of school districts, of school boards. And they said, we don't get to do our jobs. We're not making decisions. What school boards and teachers are largely doing is looking at federal and state diktat and then figuring out how to actually take this and be able to teach children with it. So it becomes an absolute mess. I think we often blame the teachers, and I think the teachers' unions are a big part of the problem. But in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, this isn't a teacher problem. This is a bureaucracy problem. Am I not correct?
Absolutely correct.
Well, good.
Bureaucracy is the problem.
Yeah, it's that was my takeaway from it, was that teachers want to teach students. Are there some lazy teachers or whatever? Sure, that's true of any industry, any sector of the economy, whatever. That's true of anything. But the vast majority of people I talked to were incredibly frustrated that they weren't allowed to do their jobs. The federal government created a series of burdens and regulations, and they are largely just test test takers, and they are constantly threatened with funding changes if they don't get certain test results. Can you talk to us a little about why we are seeing an increasing amount of children being labeled as special needs and being put in special needs classes and being put on medications and things like that? Is that related to No Child Left Behind and other regulations?
It's more related to how the state funding formulas work, from what I understand and have seen in the past in local school districts, including the one where I started researching. It's because they get their foundation level from the state here in Illinois was about $5,000 per child. But if you have a student with an IEP plan because of some type of special need that they need, some of them I saw were actually just because the student was shy, that money then became over $8,000 per student and sometimes even more. So it was an incentive to them to give kids an IEP to be able to get more money. And then the Ritalin and things like that for students, really, I think that's more of, they have so much stuff they need to get into the classroom that they just don't want to handle kids the way they used to anymore. And they haven't trained teachers to really handle kids that are more active and stuff. So their way to do that is to just kind of medicate them so they sit down and be quiet and just sit at their desk and do kind of what they're told. So all these regulations end up getting more of the accelerated kids brought back toward the middle, where they're trying to get the other kids, kind of brought up to the middle.
Pulled up,
But it ends up just bringing everybody down. Even the middle gets brought down as well because of the way everything is being done right now. And parents got to be upset about this. Actually, there's a recent survey that showed if parents had a choice, 36% of them would choose a private school. And you're like, 33% of teachers would choose a private school. And that doesn't count the number that would choose a charter school or homeschooling.
Wow. So even with all the propaganda about private schooling and school choice and things like that come out of the teachers' unions, a third of teachers are saying that they would rather deal with a private schooling system than deal with the government schooling system. That is incredible. Yes. Another big part about, labeling kids as special needs is that exempts them from the testing requirements. So they get more money and they get, or the testing requirements are lower or something like that.
The testing requirements are different, but they're still there. That was one of the things they argued about with No Child Left Behind, because even the kids with their IEPs had to still take all the tests and then they were counted. Now they're kind of part of a subgroup under ESSA, but they still do have to have the testing. It's just kind of counted in different ways. And that's why you see more and more schools actually now are finally moving to more of the growth from the first of the year to the end of the year, how much the student had actually grown rather than the standardized test. My take on standardized tests, they're tools for the bureaucrats. They're not tools for teachers.
That's correct. And they're not tools for kids. I remember, and I mean, I was in a far less, I was in school in the 80s and 90s and late 80s and through the 90s. And it was already hard to keep, people are going to be shocked to hear this, but I was a bit of a precocious kid. And I ended up, by the time middle school rolled around, they were just handing us tests every day. We weren't learning things. We were being taught to memorize stuff. And we were then taking tests. And, I thankfully, for the most part, was able to do the test, but there were kids with testing anxiety that, ended up being put in remedial classes. And it was just because that's not how you teach kids, in my personal situation, I ended up turning to drugs mostly because I was bored. And then as a result of that, I completely fell off. I was telling you during while we were getting ready to start the show that, if it wasn't for my parents being willing to, intervene and homeschool me a couple times during schooling, and especially those last couple years in high school, I might have ended up in juvie. I might have ended up in this whole school to prison pipeline, and I'm grateful to them for that. But it hurts me because there are a lot of people whose parents aren't in a position to be able to, do that for them, and it's just terrible to see. Talk to us about how Common Core works into it, because I hear a lot of different things about Common Core, and I hear everything from it's great to it is it's the implementation of communism in our schools and everything in between. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what Common Core is. Tell us, what is Common Core, and how has it affected education in this country? I almost said healthcare again.
Right. Well, Common Core is really kind of a guideline, and some of it isn't bad.
Okay.
But the problems was how it was implemented, how basically the Obama administration, when they came in, basically bribed the states to take Common Core. But the real problem with Common Core was it allowed almost every bad curriculum ever written to be into the schools. All they had to do was say it was Common Core aligned, and schools were buying it whether the curriculum was good or bad. That was really the problem. So some of Common Core was not great the way it was done, but some of it was actually pretty good. But the problem is it doesn't solve the problem. It still puts the government in control instead of putting the parent in control. I mean, to me, if a parent wants to have a school that uses Common Core aligned curriculum, go for it. But if a parent doesn't want a child in that, then they should be able to go to whatever school or whatever other entity that's not teaching Common Core aligned. That's really the solution. Common Core doesn't really matter. It's whatever these next fads coming down. The social emotional learning is another fad coming down. Some of that is really good. Students actually need to learn how to deal with their emotions.
But
again, it's going to be misused. So the parents don't have any power in this situation, and that's the real problem here.
Yeah, and this is what I heard over and over again on the campaign trail from teachers, from parents, from some. I had some high school students that came out and asked me questions about it, and what they said is essentially there were many different ways that they said it, but it was all basically the same thing. We have no control over our schools. It's not working. Our children are falling behind. Those who understood how the global marketplace is working are like, our kids are wholly unprepared for the labor competition environment of the future, even just in this country, especially, and not to mention in other countries. It's costing us a fortune. Our property taxes are going through the roof, supposedly to pay for all this, and yet it is increasingly substandard. So I think that there is, and that's why polling shows that things like school choice, like homeschooling co-ops and things like that are increasingly popular, despite billions of dollars being spent on pro-government propaganda saying, no, the problem is we just need more of your money. That's, it's not the problem with this race car isn't that the engine is broken and the transmission fell out. We need to pour more gas on top of the car. That will fix this.
Yeah, parents don't even understand how much money is being spent in the public school system right now anyway. I mean, there's schools in Illinois that are spending like a little over $4,000 per student and are doing fine. There's other schools that are spending over $20,000 a student and aren't. And if you ever ask a superintendent, one question I used to love to ask superintendents and teachers and anybody that high up in education was, how much money is enough? You keep saying you want more. How much money is enough? And I've only had one person actually answer that question, because most of them are always going to be, the answer is always more. So
what just out of curiosity, what was their answer to that?
Their answer was about $21,000 per student. And when I pointed out that was actually Chicago Public Schools, that part of them were almost at $21,000, and Washington, D.C. was over $30,000, they were starting to backtrack and say, well, it depends on the student. They immediately started backtracking once I confronted them with that number.
$21,000, a new car per student every year.
Yep. I mean, private schools operate for a lot less than that.
Yeah.
Most private schools are under $10,000. Actually, most private schools actually cost less than a public school to operate, and most parents don't understand that. The teachers union and their propaganda again is like, private schools are only
very expensive.
Rich elite students, and the majority of them aren't. There are a few, yes, absolutely, but the majority aren't. The majority are trying to help students, and their tuition is less per year than what public schools are spending per year.
And that's while they're competing with a monopoly that that can just suck money from people, at will whenever they want to, and yet they still are able to outperform that entity, surprisingly enough. So it's almost like government. I often say I was right before the show. I tried putting together a comprehensive list of things that government does not suck at, and the pen didn't work because I got it from the government. No, so listen, I think we've kind of driven home the fact that government has done a bad job at this. But, let's talk solutions. What are some of the free market solutions to education that can create serious reforms and improve the educational outcomes of students and teachers and parents?
Well, the simple idea is fund children, not systems.
Right.
But then as you get into the mechanisms of how you do it, and there's lots of different ways. A lot of people like the voucher method. That was one of the early ones started back in Indiana in 1990, or not in Indiana, Milwaukee. Vouchers started in Milwaukee. And there's a few states with vouchers and stuff. There's about 188,000 kids nationwide that are on vouchers. Vouchers are really just a certificate where the government says, I will pay for your child to go to another school. Those are very highly regulated, and those are really not a good free market solution. They're better than nothing, but they're not a good free market solution. Getting into education savings accounts has kind of been a better method, because then the parent controls a fund where all the money is in that for the child. They can spend it on books, uniforms, the tuition, travel back and forth, even for specialized therapies, which is used in a lot of states, especially Arizona, Oklahoma, that does some of this. And then there's tax credit scholarships, which is where private donors give money to a scholarship granting organization that then they get a tax credit. Typically, it's not always dollar for dollar, but it's some percentage of a dollar on their state taxes. So the states are basically saying, we'll give you this credit, but you're giving money specifically for education. Florida has the largest tax credit scholarship program now with over 100,000 students, and there's about 275,000 nationwide in tax credit scholarship programs. There's actually 24 programs in 19 states now with tax credit scholarships. And so those are very, very useful. They're usually typically just go to tuition. So there's a new thing that hasn't passed yet that's a really good idea, is tax credit scholarships to actually fund an education savings account. So the donors are giving money for the tax credit scholarship that's then funding a fund for the parents to then control through this organization. So it's legit and everybody knows it's going for educational purposes. That's kind of the newest free market solution. It's probably the best of both worlds, of the least regulation and still providing exactly what kids need, more so than just a tax credit scholarship, and definitely more so than just a voucher.
And that coupled with, I would imagine, deregulation, removing the federal regulations and everything, or at least removing the bulk of them and getting rid of a lot of the statewide regulations, and kind of decentralizing, allowing individual school districts to decide what their educations look like and be empowered with their own funding to do so.
Yeah, that would be helpful, but that's not happening anytime soon. Before we get to deregulation, we're going to have more kids that are basically using tax credit scholarships in ESA and education choice before the deregulation really happens. Several states do have open enrollment where a kid in one school district can actually apply for another school district and go to school over in another district, as long as they have room for students and can take more students and stuff. So that's kind of one method within the public school system that is allowing more choice as well too there. But we got a long way to go before we ever get to really actually deregulating state codes and then federal codes and getting them out of the way of the education system.
I want it now. I want the whole thing now. So so you mentioned school choice and how you didn't think it's a free market solution. And I am with you, my friend, because I've talked with a lot of people who are like, school choice, assign the money to the students instead of the schools. And yes, I agree with that. And like you said, is it better? Is it the, I guess, lesser evil of what we have now? Absolutely. Here's my fear of it long term. And you can tell me if I'm just being a conspiracy nut. or if I'm right. My concern is that if school choice was to become standardized across the country, you would very quickly have the federal government being, or I guess either, however it's implemented, either the federal government or the individual state governments being the main funding source of private schools. And even if it didn't start this way, eventually, very quickly, that money would come with strings. So not only would you now have government involvement, more government involvement in private schools with the strings attached to the funding, and would you now increasingly have private schools geared towards the government as the real client instead of the parents and the students, but by implementing that, they will have gotten rid of the only bastion of free market education left besides homeschooling. Is that not, I mean, it's like a camel's nose under the tent type of thing. Is that not a legit concern?
It is a legit concern, but the way around it, vouchers are the most regulated. Vouchers are kind of there would be a lot more regulations on vouchers than any other type. If you go tax credit scholarships,
right,
and then them funding ESAs, it's going to be very, very difficult to ever regulate those because the donors would stop giving and stuff too. It would be almost impossible for the governments to start regulating those. And the other fact is that most of those programs, all the programs, are at the state level, not the federal level. So if the federal government tried to regulate them, the state could go, no, our program's working great. You're not touching it. We're not dealing with this. So it's kind of insulated that way by being at state level programs. That's why, as education reform advocate, I would rather work at the state level than at the federal level. I know President Trump tried to talk about a lot about school choice and stuff like that, but it's still so much better and less regulated at the state level and keeping the federal government completely out of it. So I would say that's the way to go about it, is ignore what the feds are doing, kind of keep them doing whatever they're doing and keep them out of school choice. Mm-hmm. And keep it all at the state level, absolutely, as much as possible, and that will prevent those regulations from creeping in.
And going to the federal model of things, instead of having one top-down solution, you've got 50 top-down solutions, which are still better than just the one. And different states can see what's working, what's not working, and tailor it as they see fit. And if we're already moving in again, I want everything now. If we're already moving in the path of deregulating down to the state level, or giving funding and putting the funding at the state level instead of more and more at the federal level, that kind of creates the momentum to say, hey, what if we did this at the school district level? And hey, do we need 40% of the regulations to come from an entity that isn't really doing anything to help either way? But I'm a dreamer. But
yeah, well, actually, Douglas County, Colorado, actually passed a school choice program within their schools, within their school system. That went all the way to the Supreme Court, but it died at it got sent back to the state Supreme Court of Colorado. At the same time of Trinity Lutheran case, they said this was wrongly decided. You need to go back and look at this case based on the Trinity Lutheran one, which was kind of the precursor to Espinoza, which got rid of the Blaine amendments. So it was the kind of beginning of that. And what happened in Douglas County, Colorado, because it came back, the teachers union went into that next school board race and decimated they threw so much money in it that their candidates won. They ended the program, so then there wasn't anything to fight for at the Supreme Court anymore, and it was gone. So it can be done at the school district level, but it's much, much harder to deal with that than at the state level. But yes, some counties have tried it.
So it's because the states have the wherewithal to fight against the teachers unions if push comes to shove, whereas some of the school districts, they just get crowded out and they can't really do it.
Yeah, it's hard on a school board race level. It is really, really hard to fight the teachers union. It's one of the things I did actually when I was doing it, and realized you can only fight and beat the teachers union so many times. They're just going to wait and keep coming back and take over the school boards. In just 2 years or 4 years, they're going to have control of the school board again, no matter how much you beat them by. It's almost impossible. That's why you kind of got to go up to the state level to really have a longer term impact.
It is hard to compete against an opponent that is able to take money from you at any time to fund their own aims, right? Like if we're playing Monopoly and it comes around to my turn and I go, all right, well, I'm going to take 2,000 of Lenny's dollars and I'm going to buy Park Place. So, like, you know, that doesn't work very well. So,
Basically, yes.
let's talk homeschooling a little bit. Where does homeschooling fit into all of this? And are there policies that can be implemented? And in fact, these ESAs that you're talking about, is that something that can be used at homeschool as well? And if so, what other things can as well?
Yes, ESAs could be used for homeschooling, and
Okay.
in fact, they are used in some states for homeschooling. Most homeschoolers, though, are not going to want to do that. What actually really works great for homeschoolers are individual tax credits or individual tax deductions. Credits are better. Where Illinois, we actually have one, and I use that because I ended up homeschooling my two children as well actually my oldest for starting in 4th grade all the way through 12th grade. We homeschooled her, and my other one after kindergarten all the way through high school. But it's a tax credit. So whenever I spent anything education related, I just saved my receipt. At the end of the year, I'm
Right.
writing that off on my taxes up to $500 per student with a few other caveats in there. But so that was pretty much it. So it was great for me. And actually, Illinois has almost 300,000 people taking advantage of that individual education tax credit. And Illinois is actually one of the best homeschooling states in the country, surprisingly, given how draconian a lot of our stuff here is.
Yeah, I'm
and our
surprised by
taxes
that.
are here in Illinois. So,
Really?
yes.
Is that just because of the regulatory structure that allows them to do it, or what led to that?
Long fight battles back in the 80s to open up homeschooling and making homeschooling legal. And one thing that's really actually kind of nice here in Illinois is homeschools are considered private schools. There is no such thing as homeschool in the legislative language, legal language in Illinois whatsoever. You are a private school. And that's one thing that's protected homeschoolers since the 1980s when it became legal here, and why Illinois is one of the best homeschooling states. Just to give you an example, a few years ago, it was actually 2012, a legislator decided they wanted all homeschoolers in Illinois to register. So they filed the bill. One of the secretaries called one of the homeschooling groups. A week later, 4,000 homeschoolers were standing in the rotunda singing songs and talking to legislators, and the bill was pulled while they were still in the rotunda having their rally, just because they saw the power of what homeschoolers can do when they band together. And that's the one thing that, across tax credit scholarships, ESA, any type of school choice, that kind of momentum, that kind of numbers will shift power at a state level very quickly to make sure they cannot add regulation to school choice and to homeschooling that way.
And the interesting thing is, that was also, I'm sure the homeschoolers and their kids that went to the rally to protest, that also was like their lesson for the day, right? So it kind of two birds with one stone. This is the thing with homeschoolers; they're at home, so if they find out that there's something that's infringing on their rights, they can say, "Hey, kids, we're going to Capitol Hill, or we're going to this, the State House, or we're going to wherever, and that's going to be today's lesson: is to, is our civic duty to fight against infringements and encroachments on our rights and our ability to do things. They're uniquely suited. Like, they're literally at home. They can go. They're not saying, the kids are in school and I'm at work. They're at home teaching the kids. So, it's kind of ideal. They're like the last people that you would want to tick off, because they can just go with the kids. They can pack up the van and come to Capitol Hill and sing songs and march and rally until you take the bill down. That's hilarious.
Yes. There's also the other side of that, though, when public schools have a bill here in Illinois. That this happens in other states too, is when they wanted something passed, they wanted here to increase taxes, is they actually bust students down for a field trip day to the Capitol, and there were hundreds and hundreds of kids there. Arne Duncan was actually famous for doing this when he was education the president in Chicago, running Chicago public schools. He would do that. He would bust kids down there by the hundreds so they could go talk to legislators to try to get tax increases.
So we're doing the opposite. Instead of coming in buses, we're coming in, thousands of minivans and cars and so forth. And the thing is, like, when you talk to a homeschooled kid, and this isn't always, but you often find that they are, first of all, they're usually more comfortable talking with adults because
Yes,
they're having a rapport with adults instead of that really weird top-down thing that is used in the Prussian model of schooling, where you're just kind of there and there's this authority figure and you never really get to question why they're an authority figure. They just are, and they hand you these things that you have to use a number 2 pencil on, and then the bell rings and you got to go to the next thing because you're being institutionalized, right? So there's this sort of like disconnect between students and adults. Adults are this it's sort of like in Peanuts, like you don't even really hear their voice, and it's like you just do what they say and whatever. Whereas in homeschooling, I have found that they often have, and I can from personal experience, I was talking with my dad about stuff. I was asking him questions. We would find out together. Instead of him having to pretend he knew everything to try to keep some kind of power balance, he'd be like, I don't know, let's go find out. And this was pre-internet. We'd go to the library and find things out. Education was fun, and I learned so much more, and it took far less time every single day to be able to do it. I would cruise through things because learning was cool. It was fun. I liked waking up and finding out stuff, and I had way more free time to then go spend time with friends afterwards.
Yep. Yeah, there was an op-ed here a couple of years ago I read about a college professor used to fight against homeschooling all the time. But when he moved to teaching at college, he kept trying to get the students to interact with him, and they weren't interacting with him until he had this one student that just kept asking him questions and kept having conversations with him the whole time during class. And finally, he asked that student, "Why are you comfortable asking all these questions when your peers aren't?" And they were like, "Oh, I was homeschooled." And now he's an advocate for homeschooling because of that experience he had, personal experience of that intergenerational learning that homeschoolers have had.
Yeah, I have a theory that the reason that I'm a millennial, so I'm not crapping on millennials. I'm just a very old millennial. I'm a millennial with male pattern baldness, right? Like I'm that first wave. Like I think 82 was the first year for millennials. 82 was
the first year. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm like the first. I was the first millennial to run for on a national ticket, and that's not because there's anything special about me. It's just this is the first time millennials qualified, so here I am. For the 35 plus age thing. All that to say, it seems like a lot of kids that are in their kids, a lot of people that are in their like mid 20s, late teens, there's this weird disconnect a lot of them have with adults, and I think it's entirely based on the fact that they were so institutionalized in the school system, and their interactions with the people in the school system outnumbered their interactions with parents and other positive role models 20-1, that even as adults now, they still have a weird interaction with other adults because they're not used to it. And I think that, this is a social thing even more so than an education thing, but it's what happens when you put kids in cubicles and treat them and basically prepare them for a life of either factory work or going into the military, which is what the Prussian model is based on, and then shove them into a 21st century environment that has nothing, that does not line up even remotely with that.
Yep, that's kind of the Prussian model. It's basically you want kids smart enough to be able to do their jobs, but not smart enough to be the boss, basically, to start their own jobs and start their own businesses is really kind of that model. You're creating widgets. They're treated like kids are treated like widgets a lot of times, especially with the funding. They're all basically funding widgets is how the government funds schools right now, because it's based on the number of children you have, which is the wrong way to fund.
Yep. We treat kids like statistics, and the stats are bad. And that's a really, really bad thing. So, Lennie, before I give you a chance to give your final thoughts, let's see if we have any questions here. We got some people that are calling you Education Santa, so that's good. Let's see. So Sherry Conover Charlo, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, Sherry, says, I was on the school board for a Catholic elementary. Our kids spent 60 hours on the state required test, plus another 12-hour test for third graders. Our vouchers came in. Teachers had to teach reading for 90 straight minutes. This is for as young as kindergarten. Granted, reading activities didn't have to be sit down, yet it's too much on the same topic. Imagine it's a snow delay and the teacher still has to teach 90 minutes straight. Add lunch and recess, and that leaves very little time left for crucial I don't know what STEAM classes are. You probably do.
Yeah, the STEM and STEAM. It's art, math, science, technology.
Oh,
And
it's
so
STEM,
kind of
but with art as
right.
Okay.
STEM with arts. Yes.
Okay. So it's just, like you said, the issue is funding is a part of it and the strings attached that come with it. But ultimately, we're not going to get the solutions we want until we get what I want, which is the full, or at least the beginning the process of deregulation and putting the power back in the hands of educators and parents to be able to empower students to actually learn and enjoy education instead of seeing it as an institution.
Yeah, and the more kids that take advantage of education choice, the faster you will get deregulation.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it starts the process. People realize, oh crap,
Yes.
the problem wasn't money. The problem was who was in charge of it. And let's keep working that way. Yeah.
And
I like how you
parents have
think.
seen a lot of that parents have seen a lot of that with the pandemic. When their kids are at home now, they get to see
Yes.
exactly what the classes are and what they're having to do to help the kids. So they're starting to get a taste of it, and we're waiting to see what's really going to happen, because it looks like the numbers so far, there's an extra 4 or 5% that are now moving to homeschooling. There's a lot of kids just being completely left behind, and the schools don't know where they are and stuff right now because they just kind of dropped out already, which is really going to be bad for society over time. The economics of this learning loss and what the pandemic is doing is going to be very, very drastic and very, very hard on a lot of students, and especially the low income and poor students, which is why school choice is even more important, because the rich already have school choice. They can go and pay for whatever they want.
Yes.
It's the low
Yes.
income that don't have school choice, that need the school choice, that need those options that they're not getting right now.
And because the funding's tied to the schools, they are essentially segregated into bad, failing schools. They're being told, hey, look, if you're poor, tough, stop being poor. Well, how am I going to stop being poor if I and my kids can't get a proper education to be able to learn, before we even get into all the economic policies that are leading to, entrenching people in poverty, just looking at education, they're not able to get the educational tools they need to be able to seek the jobs of the future to do that. And we tell them, tough, stop being poor. So if nothing else, tying the funding to the students instead of to the schools, if nothing else, solves that, or at least greatly ameliorates that problem, and it forces those schools to either be good or go out of business and be replaced with one that is.
Exactly. And public schools right now don't have that. They have no fallback. They're just going to keep getting money. They're not going to get closed, where public schools and private schools and charter schools, all of them will close. If they lose students, they're going to close. But you mentioned segregation a minute ago, and this is something I've talked about a lot. There was actually just a study done that showed, 1968, before all of the desegregation and everything happened, 77% of Black students were in predominantly white schools. That dropped all the way down to 63% in 1988, when they were really trying to desegregate, integrate the schools a lot better. And that was working in the 1988s. But 2018, that number is back to 81%. So public schools right now are more segregated now than they were in 1968.
Wow. And
So,
now, and now you can't point to it as an evil. You can't say, look, they're forcing, Black kids to be in substandard schooling. You go, oh, well, this is just the reality of our system. Well, the de facto reality is segregation into substandard schools with no effective way to be able to change it until we change the way that the funding's even happening. That is
Exactly. Yep.
Wow. See, this is the problem. I'm already a libertarian, right? But then I get people like you on the show who drive down into even greater detail how much government sucks at stuff, and it makes me even more libertarian. So, I'm trying to stay relatable, Lenny. Like, come on, man. Lenny, listen, this was fantastic. This is exactly, I think you are obviously an expert on this, and your ideas are exactly, it sounds like, what we need to do to at least start the incremental process, because as much as I hate it, we're not going to snap our fingers and have, fully decentralized schooling overnight, but we can at least start the process of moving to that. So, hey man, thanks so much for coming on. Before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to give your final word. Anything that you feel like we didn't get a chance to say, if there's anything you'd like to promote, plug your website, your pages, anything that you want to say, anything you want to promote, Lennie Jarratt, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, it really comes down to the simple fact of we have the solution already to fix education. It's funding children, not systems. And then that will drive everything else. It'll drive the deregulation. It'll drive the state back out of controlling local control. It puts parents in charge. So we're empowering the parents to do what they need to do to make sure their child gets the best education, because they know what your best education is for their child better than somebody in their state capital, and certainly better than somebody in Washington, D.C. But if you ever want more information, actually, I work for a great organization, ACE Scholarships, out of Denver, and they work in 8 states. And they provide scholarships to low-income students that gives these students the opportunity to be able to get a better choice, to get a better education. And it completely changes not only them, it actually changes their parents. Parents of these students that ACE uses are, in 3 years, they're going back and getting their own degrees. They're increasing their job opportunities, increasing their own income because of the education that they're seeing in their children and the opportunity their children are getting. So yeah, acescholarships.org, if anybody's interested in coming and looking at more information, and helping low-income students outside, without waiting for state regulations. Most of our programs are private programs. So we're helping students that are right now public schools and helping them get to private schools, regardless of what the government says do or don't do. We're already just doing it regardless anyway. And people are donating and putting their money where their mouth is and actually helping students right now.
That is awesome, man. Where can people find you personally? Because what I'm getting is we need more Lennie. Where can we find Lennie? We love Lennie. Lennie. Like literally someone wrote Lennie. Where can people find you, man?
I've most of my political stuff and everything I've done outside, I've kind of gotten away from all of that. But there is a Universal Education Choice page on Facebook that you can find and follow my stuff there when I post about education choice, or at ACE Scholarship. It's actually act.act.acescholarships.org. And you can look there, and all the studies and all the work I'm doing at ACE and writing and stuff there is there as well. So those would be the 2 places to find me.
Universal School Choice.
Universal Education Choice.
Universal Education Choice on Facebook, and ACT Scholarships on Facebook?
No, it's act.acescholarships.org on the as a web address.
Is the website. Okay, yeah, we got hashtag Team Lennie. Yes. You're a hit, Lennie. Everyone loves you. This is now, so from now on, folks, this is going to be My Fellow Americans with Lennie Jarratt. I'm going to retire. Everyone loves Lennie. Lennie, can we get you back on, hopefully in the near future?
Sure, absolutely. I'd love it.
I think that'd be fantastic, man. Hey, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate you. Stick around. I'm going to talk with you during the outro. But thank you again, man. You are fantastic. Right. You just got hundreds of new fans. Actually, thousands of new fans. You just got a lot of new fans, Lennie. But folks, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of My Fellow Americans. I had a really great time talking about education. Once again, shocker to no one, the problem is that power and money and opportunities and freedom have been taken out of the hands of the people, put in the hands of politicians and bureaucrats and cronies, and the solution, equally not a surprise, is to take that power back, which is what we talk about on this show every single time I go live, because that's my thing. So thank you again for tuning into this episode. What do we have coming up? Let's see. So on tomorrow, I will be on a very special episode of the Chris and Spikey Show with Spike and Chrissy. That will be tomorrow at, I believe, 8 p.m. And why don't I just pull up the calendar? I'm sitting there fumbling through trying to remember what I'm doing. Let me just pull up the calendar. Everyone keeps track. Everyone is used to me having no idea what I'm doing. No, I'm wrong. It's at 8 on Friday. Tomorrow at 8, I'm going to be on the Post Political podcast, and that is live, so check that out. And I will also be on the Chris and Spikey Show with Spike and Chrissy on Friday, and then I'm going to take the weekend. Oh, no, I'm doing stuff on the weekend too, but nothing that's live. And then join me next Monday for Culture of Winning, where I talk with libertarians who get elected to office to demystify that idea of libertarians winning and talk to them about how we can build a blueprint for libertarians to win across the country. My guest next Monday will be Aaron Wright. And then join us next Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern for the Muddy Waters of Freedom, where Matt Wright and I parse through the week's events like the 2020 Wonder Boys that we are. And then tune in next week right here, same Spike place, same Spike time, for another episode of My Fellow Americans with Jason Spire. Folks, thanks again for tuning in. I'm Spike Cohen, and you are the power. God bless, guys.
They say about an eye for an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny when cry when a loved one dies? I recognize that body outside with the holes in the body that was alive. Now confined with a chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. All these years I close my eyes, open up to only find I'm in line. There's a pointless murder happening all the time. Either lose your life or mine. Caught up in them versus die. That ain't how it started, nah. How were we supposed to survive? There's a war going on outside. Who would want to raise a child? Whom the tomb is flashing by. Now you have to say goodbye when you watch them on the news at 5. Don't tell me how, tell me why.
We